The party was in full swing when Dad called for everyone's attention. It was his 60th birthday celebration, held at the country club he'd belonged to for 30 years. 200 guests filled the ballroom. Business associates, old military buddies, extended family, people from the yacht club. Everyone who mattered in Dad's carefully curated world. I stood near the bar with my cousin Maya, watching him take the microphone. "Thank you all for being here." Dad's voice boomed across the room, still strong, still commanding, even at 60. 30 years since he'd left the military, but he never really stopped being Colonel Richard Hawthorne. "This has been an incredible year. My company hit record profits. My golf game improved." Laughter from the crowd. "And I finally managed to teach my son the business." He gestured to my brother Trevor, who raised his glass from the head table where he sat with his wife and kids. "The golden child, as always." "Trevor's taking over as coup next month," Dad continued, "carrying on the Hawthorne legacy the right way, with vision, with integrity, with respect for what I've built." The applause was enthusiastic. "Some people understand legacy," Dad said, and his eyes found me across the room. "Some people understand that family means loyalty, means respecting the work that came before. And some people, ... He paused for effect. "Well, some people think they can show up after years of absence and make demands." My stomach tightened. "My daughter Cassie is suing me." He said it like a joke, and the room rippled with uncomfortable laughter. "She thinks she's entitled to part of her grandfather's estate. The estate I inherited. The estate I've been managing for 8 years. Apparently, after barely speaking to me for a decade, she's decided family suddenly matters." Maya touched my arm. "Cass, we should go." But I couldn't move. "The case goes to court Monday," Dad continued, "and I want everyone here to know I raised my children to be strong, to be independent, to stand on their own. I'm proud of Trevor for doing exactly that. And Cassie," he looked directly at me. "Sweetheart, if you'd have spent half as much time building a relationship with me as you did building that lawsuit, maybe we wouldn't be here. But you made your choice. Monday, the judge will make his." He raised his glass. "To family, real family. The kind that shows up not just when there's money involved, but every day." The toast echoed around the room. I set down my drink and walked out. Maya followed me to the parking lot. "That was brutal," she said, "even for Uncle Richard. He's been doing that my whole life." I fumbled for my car keys, making me look like the problem, making himself look like the reasonable one. "Cass, what's this really about?" "Your grandfather's estate." I leaned against my car and looked up at the stars. "Grandpa Joe left me something. In his will. Something specific. Dad has been stonewalling me for 8 years, claiming the will was unclear, that Grandpa was confused at the end, that everything was meant to go through him first." "What did Grandpa leave you?" "Documents. Information. His military records." I paused. "And a letter telling me where to find something that Dad doesn't want found." Maya's eyes widened. "What kind of something?" "I don't know exactly." The letter was cryptic, but Grandpa Joe was very specific. He said, if Dad ever tried to block me from accessing it, I was to use 3 words in any legal proceeding. I pulled out my phone and showed her the photo. ID taken of Grandpa's letter before my dad's attorney claimed it was irrelevant to estate matters. Maya read it and looked up at me, confused. "Winter Garden Project." "What does that mean?" "I have no idea." But Grandpa was adamant. He wrote, "If Richard blocks you in court, if a judge dismisses your claim, say these 3 words to the presiding judge, Winter Garden Project. It will change everything." That's cryptic as hell. Grandpa Joe spent 35 years in military intelligence before he retired. If he left me a code phrase, there's a reason. I opened my car door. Monday's hearing is my last chance. Dad's attorney has filed for dismissal. If the judge grants it, I lose access to whatever Grandpa wanted me to have. Are you going to say it? The code phrase, if I need to. I slid into the driver's seat. Dad thinks I'm just a bitter daughter looking for money. He has no idea what's actually at stake. Flashback 10 years earlier, I was 23 when Grandpa Joe died. He'd been declining for months, but his mind stayed sharp until the very end. The week before he passed, he called me to his bedside at the VA hospital. Cassie. His grip on my hand was weak, but insistent. I need you to listen carefully. Don't interrupt. Don't ask questions until I'm done. I nodded. Your father is a good man in many ways. He served his country with honor. He built a successful business. But he has secrets, Cassie. Things he did during his service that I helped cover up because that's what we did back then. We protected our own. Grandpa, let me finish. He coughed, a rattling sound. I kept records. Documentation of operations your father participated in. Operations that weren't entirely legal. Operations that involved civilian casualties that were never reported. I kept these records as insurance, in case the government ever tried to pin responsibility on lower-ranking officers. But now I'm dying, and these records need to be protected by someone who'll do the right thing. My hands were shaking. I'm leaving you these documents in my will. Your father will try to block you from accessing them. He'll use every legal means available. When he doesn't, you need to use a code phrase that will force disclosure. It's a reference to one of the operations. The presiding judge will understand. What if the judge doesn't know what it means? Any federal judge with the right clearance will know. It's part of their briefing on classified military operations that might come up in civilian court. The phrase will trigger a protocol. He squeezed my hand. Promise me you'll fight for these records. Promise me you'll do what's right with them when you get them. I promise. He died 3 days later. At the will reading, Dad's face went white when the attorney read the clause about Grandpa's military documents being bequeathed to me. That's a mistake, Dad said immediately. Dad was confused at the end. He didn't understand what he was signing. But the will was ironclad. Grandpa had used a military attorney, someone who specialized in classified materials and estate law. Dad began the legal obstruction the next week. Monday morning, the courthouse I arrived at the courthouse at 8:30 a.m. wearing my best suit. My attorney, Margaret Cho, met me on the steps. She was sharp, experienced, and had worked on military cases before, though even she didn't know about the code phrase. Some things were too sensitive to discuss, even with your own lawyer. Your father's attorney filed 3 additional motions this morning, she said grimly. They're really pushing for dismissal. Let them push. Inside, the courtroom was smaller than I expected. Dad sat at the plaintiff's table with his attorney, Richard Morrison, a man who'd built his career on estate law and making problems disappear. Trevor sat behind them in the gallery, looking smug. Dad didn't look at me when I walked in. Judge Patricia Coldwell entered at 9 a.m. sharp. She was in her early 60s, gray hair pulled back severely, reading glasses perched on her nose. She looked at the case file with the expression of someone who'd seen 1,000 family disputes and found them all equally tedious. Hawthorne estate dispute, she said. Ms. Cho, you're representing the petitioner, Cassandra Hawthorne. Yes, Your Honor. And Mr. Morrison represents Richard Hawthorne, executor of the estate and the respondent in this matter? Correct, Your Honor. Judge Coldwell flipped through the file. I've reviewed the briefs. Mr. Morrison, you've filed for dismissal on grounds that the petitioner has no standing to claim specific bequest of classified military materials. That's correct, Your Honor. The decedent, Joseph Hawthorne, included language in his will that would require the release of potentially classified government materials to a civilian with no clearance and no legitimate need for access. Such a bequest is legally unenforceable. The judge looked at me. Ms. Hawthorne, do you have security clearance? Margaret stood. No, Your Honor, but... Then Mr. Morrison's argument has merit. Judge Coldwell closed the file. I see no legal pathway for enforcing a bequest of classified materials to an individual without proper authorization. The will's language regarding military documents is void as a matter of law. My heart was pounding. Furthermore, the judge continued, this appears to be a family dispute, disguised as an estate matter. The petitioner's grandfather died 8 years ago. The estate was settled. The primary heir was the decedent's son, Richard Hawthorne, who has been managing family assets in accordance with the will's general provisions. Coming forward now with claims about specific documents suggests this is more about family discord than legitimate legal claims. Dad's attorney was smiling. Therefore, Judge Coldwell said, "I'm granting the motion to dismiss. This case is your honor." I stood up. Everyone turned to look at me. "Yes, Ms. Hawthorne." The judge sounded annoyed. "May I approach the bench? I have information relevant to this case that should be discussed in chambers." "Ms. Hawthorne," Margaret whispered urgently, "what are you doing?" Judge Coldwell frowned. "I've made my ruling, Ms. Hawthorne. Unless you have new evidence that fundamentally changes the legal standing Winter Garden project." The room went silent. The judge's expression didn't change, but something flickered in her eyes, something sharp and alert. "Excuse me." Her voice was carefully neutral. "Winter Garden project, Your Honor." "That's the relevant information." Judge Coldwell stared at me for 5 full seconds. Then she said, very quietly, "Everyone out. Clear the courtroom. Now." "Your Honor?" Morrison stood up, confused. "What's happening?" I said, "Clear the courtroom. Bailiff, escort everyone to the hallway. Now." The bailiff moved immediately. "Everyone, up. Let's go." Outside. Dad looked bewildered. Trevor was trying to ask questions. Margaret looked at me like I'd lost my mind. Within 60 seconds, the courtroom was empty except for me, Judge Coldwell, and the bailiff standing by the door. The judge removed her reading glasses and set them down carefully. When she looked at me again, her entire demeanor had changed. She wasn't annoyed anymore. She was focused with an intensity that made my skin prickle. "Where did you hear that phrase?" Her voice was low, controlled. "My grandfather, Joseph Hawthorne. He told me to say it if I was ever blocked from accessing the documents he left me. Joseph Hawthorne." She pulled out her phone and made a call. "This is Judge Coldwell District Court. I need immediate secure line access to DoD classification review. Priority Alpha." A pause. "Yes, I'll wait." She looked at me while she waited. "Do you have any idea what you just said?" "No, Your Honor. Only that my grandfather said it would matter." "It matters." She listened to her phone, then spoke rapidly. "This is Coldwell. I need immediate background on Operation Winter Garden. I have a civilian claimant in my courtroom who just invoked it in an estate dispute." "Yes, I'll hold." My hands were shaking. The judge waited, listening. Then she said, confirmed, "Yes, I understand. Immediate secure chambers review." "Yes." She hung up. "Ms. Hawthorne, I need you to understand something very clearly. The phrase you just said triggers a federal protocol for handling specific classified operations that may arise in civilian legal proceedings. I'm required by law to secure this courtroom and review the classification status before proceeding. I understand you, because what you've just done is invoke a national security protection that very few civilians even know exists. Your grandfather must have had extraordinary clearance to know about it. He worked in military intelligence for years. Then he knew exactly what he was doing when he gave you that phrase." She picked up the gavel she'd nearly dropped. "Bailiff, I need this courtroom sealed. No one in or out. Contact courthouse security. Tell them we have a Code Silver situation." The bailiff's eyes widened. "Code Silver. Judge? I know what it is. Do it now." He grabbed his radio and stepped outside. Judge Coldwell looked at me. "Your father was part of Operation Winter Garden." "I don't know. My grandfather never explained. He just said the documents he was leaving me related to operations my father participated in, and your father has been blocking your access to these documents for 8 years. Yes, Your Honor." She nodded slowly. "That makes sense now. He knows what's in them. He doesn't want them disclosed." She paused. "Ms. Hawthorne, what you've just done is opened a very complex can of worms. Documents related to Operation Winter Garden are classified at the highest levels. If your grandfather bequeathed them to you, There was a reason, but accessing them will require a security review, clearance verification, and potentially congressional oversight. I just want what my grandfather left me. I understand, but this is no longer a simple estate dispute. This is a matter of national security protocol. She stood up. I'm going to make several calls. You're going to wait here? Your father and his attorney are not allowed back in until I've consulted with DOD and determined how to proceed. Do you understand? Yes, Your Honor. She walked toward her chambers, then stopped and turned back. Ms. Hawthorne, your grandfather was protecting you. That phrase, it's a safeguard. It means that anyone who tries to block access to those documents can be investigated for obstruction of classified material disclosure protocols. Your father just went from a state executor to potential federal investigation subject. I didn't know that. I believe you, but your grandfather did. She disappeared into her chambers. I sat alone in the sealed courtroom, my heart racing, wondering what exactly Grandpa Joe had been involved in, and what my father had done that was worth hiding for 8 years. 30 minutes later, the courtroom doors opened. 2 people in suits entered, a man and a woman, both wearing Department of Defense credentials. They were followed by Judge Coldwell, who looked like she'd aged 5 years in 30 minutes. Ms. Hawthorne, the woman said, I'm Agent Sarah Martinez, DOD Classification Review. This is Agent David Chun. We need to ask you some questions. Okay. Your grandfather, Joseph Hawthorne, served in military intelligence from 1968 to 2003. During that time, he participated in numerous classified operations, including Operation Winter Garden, which took place between 1984 and 1987. Are you aware of what that operation involved? No. Your father, Richard Hawthorne, was a Marine Corps officer assigned to Operation Winter Garden as a tactical liaison. The operation has remained classified due to the sensitive nature of the activities involved. Your grandfather kept documentation of certain incidents that occurred during that operation, incidents that were never officially reported. No. Civilian casualties, I said quietly. That's what Grandpa told me before he died. Agent Martinez nodded. Among other things, your grandfather created what we call an insurance file, documentation kept by intelligence officers to protect themselves and their teams from being scapegoated if operations went wrong. These files are technically illegal to maintain, but they're not uncommon. Is my father in trouble? That depends on what the documents contain and whether there's evidence of criminal misconduct versus operational decisions made in the fog of war. Agent Chun spoke for the first time. Your grandfathers will specifically named you as the recipient of these documents. That suggests he trusted you to handle them appropriately. What happens now? Judge Coldwell cleared her throat. The DOD is going to conduct a classification review of the documents in question. You'll need to undergo a temporary security clearance process. Once cleared, you'll be given access to the materials under controlled conditions. After you've reviewed them, you'll need to decide whether to turn them over to military investigation, congressional oversight, or whether they simply become part of a sealed family archive. How long will that take? The clearance. 2 to 3 weeks for expedited processing. Agent Martinez handed me a card. But Ms. Hawthorne, I need to be clear. Once you access these documents, you become responsible for them. You'll be bound by federal secrecy laws. You can't discuss the contents with anyone without authorization. This isn't just about your family anymore. I understand. Do you? She studied me. Because your grandfather puts you in an impossible position. He gave you information that could destroy your father's reputation, possibly result in criminal charges, and definitely tear your family apart. He did that because he believed someone outside the military chain of command needed to know the truth about what happened. But that's a heavy burden. I thought about Dad's speech at his birthday party, about Trevor's smug face, about 8 years of being dismissed, being called vindictive, being painted as the problem. My grandfather trusted me with this for a reason, I said. I'm not going to waste that trust. Agent Martinez nodded. We'll be in touch about the clearance process. 2 hours later, they finally let everyone back into the courtroom. Dad looked furious. Morrison looked confused. Margaret looked like she'd been hit by a truck. Trevor kept trying to catch my eye. I didn't look at him. Judge Coldwell returned to the bench. This case is not dismissed, she said flatly. In fact, this case is being transferred to federal court for specialized handling. The documents in question are subject to national security protocols. Ms. Cassandra Hawthorne will undergo security clearance review to access materials bequeathed to her by her grandfather. Mr. Richard Hawthorne, you are hereby ordered to turn over all estate materials related to Joseph Hawthorne S. military service to the Department of Defense Classification Review Office within 72 hours. Your Honor, Morrison stood up. On what grounds? On the grounds that your client has been obstructing access to potentially classified materials for 8 years, and that obstruction may constitute a federal violation. Sit down, Mr. Morrison. He sat. Furthermore, Richard Hawthorne is prohibited from contacting Cassandra Hawthorne or any members of the DoD review team during the investigation period. Any violation will result in contempt charges and potential federal prosecution. She looked at Dad. Do you understand, Mr. Hawthorne? Dad's face was gray. Yes, Your Honor. Good. This hearing is adjourned. Federal court will contact all parties regarding next steps. The gavel came down. In the courthouse hallway, Dad cornered me by the elevators. What did you do? His voice was low, dangerous. What did you say to that judge? I said what Grandpa told me to say. You have no idea what you've done. No idea what's in those files. Then maybe you should have let me access them 8 years ago instead of making this a fight. Those documents could destroy me. Destroy everything I've built. Your grandfather was a vindictive old man who... Don't. I stepped closer. Don't you dare talk about Grandpa Joe that way. He spent his career protecting people like you, and when he saw what you'd become, he made sure there was a record, a truth. He gave that truth to me because he knew I'd do the right thing with it. The right thing? Dad laughed bitterly. You're just like him. Self-righteous, sanctimonious, thinking you're better than everyone else? No, Dad. I just think people should be accountable for their actions. Even Jew. Trevor appeared behind Dad. Castus in sand. You're going to ruin his reputation over some old military records that probably do even mean anything. If they don't mean anything, why has he been fighting so hard to keep them sealed? Trevor had no answer. I didn't want it to go this way, I said quietly. I asked nicely for 8 years. I tried to work with you. I tried to understand your position, but you made me the villain in your story, Dad. You told everyone I was greedy, vindictive, bitter. You mocked me at your birthday party in front of 200 people. You were suing me. I was trying to honor Grandpa's wishes. There's a difference. My voice cracked. But you couldn't just let me have this one thing. You couldn't just trust that maybe Grandpa knew what he was doing. You had to control it. Control me. Control the narrative. Dad's jaw was clenched. When you see what's in those files, when you understand what kind of decisions had to be made in the field, under impossible circumstances, then I'll understand, and I'll decide what to do with that information, the way Grandpa wanted. I pressed the elevator button. Goodbye, Dad. The elevator doors opened. I stepped inside. Cassie. Dad's voice stopped me. If you do this, if you expose what's in those files, we're done. You understand that? You won't have a family anymore. I looked at him, at Trevor, standing beside him, at Morrison hovering nearby with his briefcase and his expensive suit. I haven't had a family for 8 years, I said. You made sure of that. The doors closed. 3 weeks later, the security clearance came through. I sat in a secure DoD facility in Virginia, across from Agent Martinez. On the table between us was a single-file box marked with classification stamps and warning labels. These are copies, she explained. The originals are in secure storage. You have 4 hours to review the contents. You can take notes, but the notes stay in this room. After you've reviewed everything, we'll discuss next steps. Okay, she laughed. I opened the box. Inside were operational reports, photographs, witness statements, and a letter from Grandpa Joe. I read the letter first. Cassie, if you're reading this, You fought past your father's obstruction. I'm proud of you. What you're about to read will be difficult. Your father participated in operations in Central America during the 1980s that resulted in civilian deaths. These deaths were covered up by military brass, who didn't want scandal. I kept these records because I knew the truth needed to be preserved. Your father isn't a monster. He is a man who made terrible choices under pressure and then spent decades trying to bury those choices. He became so invested in his own narrative, the war hero, the successful businessman, the perfect father to Trevor, that he couldn't admit what he'd done. But the families of those civilians deserve the truth. The other soldiers who questioned those operations deserve validation, and your father deserves the chance to finally be honest, even if it destroys him. I'm giving you this choice because you're stronger than he is. You're braver than he is, and you'll do what's right, even when it's hard. Use this information wisely. Don't weaponize it. Don't be cruel. But don't let him bury it anymore. I love you. I trust you. Grandpa, I spent the next 3 hours reading through operational reports about a village in Nicaragua, about faulty intelligence, about civilians mistaken for insurgents, about 19 deaths that were never officially reported, about my father's signature on reports that omitted key details and falsified casualty counts, about other officers who questioned the operation and were reassigned or forced out, about decades of cover-up. When Agent Martinez returned, I was crying. What do you want to do? She asked gently. I wiped my eyes. I want to turn these over to the Senate Armed Services Committee. I want a formal investigation, and I want the families of those civilians to finally know what happened. That will destroy your father's reputation. I know it may result in criminal charges against him and others. I know that too. Your family will never forgive you. I thought about Dad's birthday party, about being called greedy and vindictive. About 8 years of legal warfare. They've already chosen, I said. Now I'm choosing too. 6 months later, the congressional hearing was closed to the public, but the findings were released in a redacted report. Richard Hawthorne and 4 other officers were found to have participated in operations that resulted in civilian casualties that were systematically underreported. No criminal charges were filed due to statute of limitations. But the military formally apologized to the families involved and established a compensation fund. Dad resigned from his company. Trevor took over, but the scandal cost them several major contracts. I received death threats from military advocacy groups who saw me as a traitor. I also received thank you letters from 3 Nicaraguan families who spent 30 years wondering what happened to their relatives. Dad never spoke to me again. Trevor sent one text. I hope you're happy. You destroyed him. I didn't respond. Epilogue: 1 year later, I was having coffee with Maya when my phone rang. Unknown number. Hello. Cassandra. Hawthorne. A woman's voice, older, with a slight accent. Yes. My name is Maria Santos. My brother died in Nicaragua in 1985. He was 17 years old. She paused. The U.S. government sent me a letter. They said you were responsible for the investigation that finally told us what happened. I set down my coffee cup. Mrs. Santos, I want to thank you. For 36 years, we didn't know. We thought maybe he joined the insurgents. Maybe he betrayed our family. Maybe he died, ashamed. Her voice broke. But now we know the truth. He was innocent. He was just in the wrong place, and your grandfather, he made sure someone would tell us someday. Tears streamed down my face. I'm so sorry for what happened to your brother. I know you are, and I know it cost you your family to tell the truth. But you gave me mine back. You gave me peace. She paused. Thank you, Miss Hawthorne. Thank you for being brave. After she hung up, I sat staring at my phone. Maya reached across the table and took my hand. You okay? Yeah, I said. I think I finally am. I thought about Grandpa Joe's letter. About doing what's right, even when it's hard. About choosing truth over comfort. About understanding that real family isn't about blood or loyalty to lies. It's about being brave enough to stand alone, if that's what integrity